Hello and welcome to the Lively Faith Podcast. I'm your host, the Reverend Nathan Stomberg, and today I am joined by the Reverend Mark Galloway. We've got a short episode for you today. We're going to be reacting to a recent development out of the Rhode Island State House. As you all know, if you've been listening to us for some time, both Mark and myself are priests based out of Rhode Island, and so we thought it was relevant for us to discuss this recent piece of approved legislation about none other than human composting. So, Mark, I'm going to read through this article that was shared with us. It's from LifeSiteNews, a reputable Catholic news agency, pro-life. And the headline is, Rhode Island House passes human composting bill despite numerous objections. And the tagline is that you can't shake the nagging image, the feeling, the part and parcel of continuation of disrespect for life, the continuation of the culture of death and callousness we see permeating through the country, a House delegate said about legalizing human composting. So this is from LifeSiteNews. The Rhode Island House of Representatives approved legislation legalizing human composting as an option instead of burial or cremation. The bill now heads to the state Senate, so it hasn't been turned into law yet, but it was approved in the Rhode Island House. So Bill H7212 would provide for the operation and duties of natural organic reduction for the contained, accelerated conversion of human remains to soil at a disposition facility. How's that for Orwellian language?
Exactly. Josh, do you know what that even means? Can you convert that for me into
Yeah, he's shaking his head.
Yeah, okay.
So all 10 sponsors of the bill in Rhode Island House are Democrats.
No way.
Surprise. Not every lawmaker in the Rhode Island House was enthusiastic about the prospect of human composting. Democrat Representative Barbara Ann Fenton Fung said that the idea of composting human bodies creeps me out. On the other hand, the darker side, where I reside, she goes on, is where you can't shake the nagging image, the feeling, the part and parcel of continuation of disrespect for life, the continuation of the culture of death and callousness we see permeating through the country. And correction, that was Representative Arthur Corvese who said that, not Barbara Fenton Fung. Today, the House passed a human composting bill that I voted against because I feel human remains must be treated with dignity and respect, Delegate Charlene Lima wrote on X. While I commend them for thinking outside the box, I think we should keep everybody inside the box in this case.
Nice line.
Yeah, that was a good one. So it's being promoted as a green alternative to burial. It goes on, not everyone is comfortable with the impact of burial, which occupies land, or cremation, which emits a significant amount of carbon, argued Representative Michelle McGaugh, who introduced the bill last year. Natural organic reduction is what they're calling it, is a greener alternative that may be preferable for those concerned about how their final wishes affect the planet. For people who have respected the earth and tried to lighten their impact on it in life, it makes sense to also want to make the greenest, most environmentally beneficial route in death. McGaugh continued, this is an option that we should work to make available here in Rhode Island for our people and for our planet. Then the article goes on to explain human composting. What is human composting? Human composting is exactly what it sounds like. Much in the way someone throws old coffee grounds or vegetable peelings into a compost pile to turn into fertilizer, the human body, a creation of God, is treated like nutrients for the dirt. LifeSiteNews' Matt Lamb wrote, describing the process earlier this year. The first step in human composting begins with the body in a cradle surrounded by organic materials such as wood chips, alfalfa, and straw. Mallory McDuff, an environmental education professor, explained last month in Wired. For about 30 days, the body remains in a vessel where microbes and heat transform it into compost. The process transforms bodies into a nutrient-rich soil, she insisted, and is a way to fight the climate emergency. Donating human remains to a body farm, here's another shocking Orwellian term, body farm, and human composting are two ways to create life from death, engage family and friends, and make a difference in our climate emergency. And tell me that you're a religion without telling me you're a religion. So McDuff says these things. She's attempting to cast the process in a favorable light. The U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops rightfully condemns human composting In a statement issued last year titled On the Proper Disposition of Bodily Remains, the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops, the USCCB, condemned the destruction of deceased human bodies through composting. Human composting is disconcerting because it leaves nothing that one can point to and identify as the remains of the body, the bishops explained. The body and the plant material have all decomposed together to yield a single mass of compost. What is left is approximately a cubic yard of compost that one is invited to spread on a lawn or in a garden or in some wilderness location. The bishops affirmed that every human being has been created in the image of God, Genesis chapter 1, and has an inherent dignity and worth. Accordingly, human beings are therefore obliged to respect our bodily existence throughout our lives and to respect the bodies of the deceased when their earthly lives have come to an end. Noting that burial is considered by the Church to be the most appropriate way of manifesting reverence and respect for the body of the deceased because it honors the children of God, who are temples of the Holy Spirit, the bishop said cremation can also be permitted so long as it's not chosen for reasons contrary to Christian doctrine. The bishops concluded their statement by reaffirming that since humans are not pure spirits like the angels, but actually share in the physicality of the material order as both body and soul, we must respect our bodily existence throughout our lives and to respect the bodies of the deceased when their earthly lives have come to an end. The way that we treat our bodies and the bodies of our beloved dead must always bear witness to our faith in and our hope for what God has promised us, they wrote. So 10 states have moved toward turning dead loved ones into potting soil, as LifeSiteNews writes. Currently 10 states, including Washington, Colorado, Oregon, Vermont, California, New York, Nevada, Arizona, Maryland, and Delaware, have either legalized the practice or are well on the way to doing so. Let's hope the choice of Deathcare, as it's put in scare quotes there, is not thrust upon anyone by mandates, wrote Leslie Eastman, commenting at Legal Insurrection on Rhode Island's move toward human composting. Unfortunately, recent experience suggests that eco-activists don't hesitate to make their preferences for today everyone's requirements for tomorrow, she added. And so the article concludes, to give appropriate credit here, LifeSiteNews, written by Doug Mainwaring. So human composting, it is approved in the Rhode Island Legislative House. It's moving on to the Rhode Island Senate. I think we can safely assume that it will eventually be codified into law. Worldview issues abound here, and as always here at Lively Faith, we are facing them head on and preparing ourselves again to enter the discourse. And Christians everywhere, we need to be aware of not only what's going on at a national level, but also be prepared to provide a defense of the Christian worldview at a local level as well. And so this should resonate with our local listeners in Rhode Island and nearby.
What was the term? Body farm?
Body farm was the term that they used, which apparently is the facility that is used to house these so-called cradles of decomposing bodies.
So when it gets to a certain point of decomposition, does it stay at the body farm, or can it be taken back to, 44 Austin Farm Road, and I can put it in the back to 4 acres?
So going off of what the article said, it sounds like it does reach a certain point where it is returned to whoever, the next of kin, as approximately a cubic yard of soil. And then much like with ashes, for example, you do with it what you will. Isn't that weird?
It's very weird because bones just don't decay that quickly.
Right. So they obviously
could take tending.
Right. I don't know how
for decades.
I don't know how long it takes, and I don't know what they're doing in these facilities. Obviously, that's why they have facilities, right? Because natural decomposition would not take place quite like that.
Right. It's all Orwellian, right? It's just this endless avalanche that we constantly have coming at us about and it's all too often tied to the environmental
right and
stuff.
We've talked about this before, where it is a neo-pagan sort of worldview where the environmentalism really becomes worship of the environment, and you've totally inverted your view of human dignity.
Right.
So this is just another example of humans are a blight on the environment, and so not even just carbon footprint, but we need to reduce our human footprint wherever possible, because humans are bad for the planet.
The human soul's not alive eternally. They believe the planet is.
Or they believe there is a duty to keep the planet alive eternally, because that's right. Their fear is climate emergency, that the planet is going to perish, and it's our fault. So we need to perform these acts of penance in order to rectify that.
I always, as I do, as you know, it's like, it's so, again, it's illogical, right? The fact is, if even with physics, the Earth isn't going to last forever because the sun's going to go out.
Right.
Right. So that it really isn't an eternal dimension to it.
Yeah.
As opposed to understanding the soul, which has an eternal dimension. That's why we treat the body and give it the reverence it's due, because it is the vessel that contains the soul, which is eternal. So even their logic's wrong. Right?
Surprise.
The Earth is never going to last forever, right? It's going to come to an end. And therefore, as Christians have proclaimed to the world for 2 centuries, really believed this is not our home, right? We're headed to a better place, to eternal in heavens. And there's so much in this, though, that strikes me about this unawareness. And I suspect there's many, quote, Christians that are involved in this silly movement.
Oh, certainly.
Right. And, one of the things that's interesting about anthropology and the whole sociological and civil evolution of the human experience, there's substantial evidence now that Neanderthals buried their dead.
That's fascinating.
Right. So our closest relatives, our cousins, right? Every one of us has somewhere between 2 and 3% Neanderthal genes in us right now. There's the genome, right? When you decode the genome, which to the surprise of many people, including in the Christian ranks, we all have DNA of Neanderthals in us, which means they interbred at some point, right? And but the Neanderthals, as primitive as they were, who haven't existed for 40,000 years, buried their dead. And there's quite a bit of evidence that they did it reverently, right? They would put certain things around them, possessions across their arms, all kinds of things. So even the most primitive of human beings, they weren't even Homo sapiens, right? They're Neanderthal. And
Homo habilis, I think it is.
They have some perception of something beyond themselves.
Yes.
Right? It's innate to us as in the human genus, right? So, it's, again, that doesn't seem to matter to these people, does it?
No. And I think so I really like how the Catholic bishops articulated the psychosomatic unity and the body-soul unity of the human person, how we're differentiated from the angels who are pure spirit, that we have a unity of body and soul, and we are vessels of the Holy Spirit, in contrast to the neo-paganism, which is really sort of a Gnostic heresy, and it's an assertion, an implicit assertion that we're not eternal beings, or we are a soul trapped in a human body, and that's something that we need to be liberated from. And the human body is bad because it emits a human footprint and a carbon footprint upon the environment, which is really the highest good of all. But I think for thinking Christians who are confronted with these things, I'm sure just as we know many people who are, again, who pursue cremation, and the bishops, of course, clarified that cremation can be permitted if it's not pursued for reasons contrary to Christian doctrine. But not to go down that road, but I'm sure in Rhode Island, once the bill passes, we can expect Christians to encounter friends and family members who very much wish to have their bodies composted. And
it's all about money.
And it's all about money and
what's going to be their cheapest
what's
option.
going to be the most affordable option. Exactly.
Right. It strikes me when they say, the human footprint, carbon footprint. So all other living animals don't have carbon footprints?
Yeah, what makes them so different?
Why? So what is it they want? Do they want an Earth rid of humanity and animal life?
So you hit upon an interesting point there, right? Because there's like this perverse anthropology of this worldview. On the one hand, they would be the first to assert that humans are no different than animals. There's nothing special about us. We are just, intelligent apes, and we happen to be a little more further evolved, but really there is no dignity that is unique to the human beings as opposed to puppies or cats or dolphins, for example. Yet at the same time, human beings are actually worse than other animals, that we are lesser than them because there is a purity to nature, almost like this Rousseauian sort of philosophy that nature is pure, and if you're untouched by civilization, you take on the idea of being this noble savage that, like natives back during ancient times, they were all pure and good and they didn't fight. And so it's all intertwined into one, right? So there's really this weird...
Nature's pure. Animals don't try to eat each other.
Exactly. And they don't do things, they don't exert biological processes that have their own carbon footprint on the environment. It's, it's illogical because it's illogical, but we've never let that get in the way before.
Let's say, it's craziness, right? It's just craziness, right? Let's get rid of humanity and all animal kind. They do know that plants war with each other, right?
I'm sure some would admit, but I don't think they really think about
right?
that.
You know what I'm talking about, right? You can put, you film the vine strangling this, and these trees compete again. It's all part of the created order, right? So there's always a survival of the fittest going on in the created order.
And that reminds me of, there's this really interesting phenomenon I read about, and I don't know where I read it. It was a while ago, and really, especially in agriculture, there is a theory of open space in agriculture and in wildlife where open space is itself a limited resource. If you think of it from like the laws of entropy and randomness,
right,
the tendency of nature is to overgrow and to encroach on open space habitats. And so you actually see, again, nature preservists and ecologists who haven't totally gone off the rails, who you may have an open space preservation where you keep it and you tend it. Some, like if you go to the Audubon Society down the road, exactly, they've got fields and they maintain the habitats that are naturally occurring to open space, and they preserve that because nature being at war with itself, if you leave some of those things untended, well, the new growth forests are going to just come right in and trample right over it, and then you lose a habitat with no human intervention whatsoever.
Right. Well, nature takes care of it by natural wildfires.
Yeah.
Which puts all the things they don't want in the atmosphere, right?
Which is another really interesting phenomenon.
But that's how nature takes care of overgrowth and all these other things, right? It's nothing to do with human beings.
Right. And there's a parallel to that, which is the terrible wildfires that we've seen in recent years that seem to be getting worse, especially in California or in places like Australia. In many instances, those wildfires happen because of poor forest management.
Right.
And so it's actually human intervention that causes the wildfires, but not because the earth is going up in flames, but because in your ill-suited attempts to preserve the forests, you actually didn't go through and cut down enough underbrush. So now the forest is taking care of it for itself, but just because of how we live in a sinful creation or a fallen creation, we end up with these catastrophic results.
Right. And at your point, your last phrase is so important. All of creation has fallen, not just humanity. All of created order has fallen, including nature and everything else. Right. And so one of the surprises of a believer, right?
Right.
Because it's true. St. Paul famously says, all the universe, all the created order groaned because of the fall.
Yes. And now creation, was it in I can't remember if it's Revelation or is it Jesus giving a discourse about the end times, that all of creation will groan with basically like birth pangs in anticipation of the second coming.
The gospel, yeah. Yeah, absolutely. But just basic Christology tells us that this isn't Christian, right? So the key is Jesus, right? So Jesus is perfectly human as well and be perfectly divine. And the body that rose from the dead was perfectly human. And the body that ascended to the right hand of the Father is perfectly human, right? And so the body of Jesus was so important that the Father wouldn't let it have decay, right? Because Jesus is the ultimate, if you will, example of the fact that God created male and female in his image. And of course, we have three other examples. Two in Scripture. Obviously, Enoch was taken, right? Didn't have death, just gone.
Yep.
And Elijah, right?
Yes.
So you have these two, and then in the tradition of the church, Mary was assumed into heaven, right? And so it's this dignity of the human person that gets lost. And these type of ideas that just, throwing mom in the trash heap is like a really good idea.
Putting her out in the garden.
Yeah. And, it's not going to end at body farms.
No, of course not.
No, of course not. That's just the beginning. It's just like every other progressive idea. We're only going to go this far. It's all we want.
That's all that ever happens.
All we're asking is like, you Neanderthal no-minds who don't know how to think like we do, we're not going to go any farther. No, because it'll be driven by the dollar. And the body farms become not as profitable or too expensive, and it starts encroaching on whatever else idea, that space they want. They'll just want you to compost in your backyard.
Yeah.
It's just inevitable. That would be
And it won't be optional because of for economic reasons or worldview reasons if they're prevailing. That's how the article concluded, that
right.
These preferences don't remain merely preferences for very long, right, if ecological ideologues have their way.
So I assume the underlying principle is they're convinced by whatever percentage of people are now cremated. I don't know exactly what it is, but that puts some astronomical amount of deadly things in the atmosphere, correct?
Presumably. I don't have any research into it, but right, if you're burning something, you are going to emit carbon, and that carbon is going to make its way into the atmosphere.
Now, why are they're opposed to just conventional burial? Why?
So they don't explicitly explain in the article. They cite concerns with space, that it takes up space in the land. So it could be some unfounded concern about space for cemeteries taking up too much room, or before we went live, we were surmising that perhaps for some there is a worldview implication of like a sacredness of the earth, and to put your body into the earth in a box indefinitely is to do some sort of harm to it, or to put some sort of imposition on it, versus becoming one with the earth, becoming dirt, and returning back to the earth as, I guess, you originally were, right? Just atoms of dust and matter and dirt.
It's silliness, right? I mean, I guess this idea of space is that because there'd be headstones everywhere. That would be the space, because it,
right.
Outside the modern era, the last 50 years, where the government decides you have to be buried in cement vaults and all this other stuff that never existed, right? So, let's even go to the medieval period. You basically buried in a burlap bag and put in the ground, right? And you just decayed.
Yeah.
And it didn't take very long. John Henry Newman, the great John Henry Newman, died in 1890, right? And then at his case, for sainthood, when it came up in the Roman Catholic Church, and we have great affection for Newman. He spent exactly half his life, 45 years, an Anglican and 45 years as a Roman Catholic. But anyway, so when his cause for sainthood came up, they wanted to disinter him and find remains for relics and so forth. And he only was buried in 1890. But because of where he was buried in the oratory that he was part of in England. Because of the wetness of the marsh, there wasn't any bones left. And what they used for relics is there was just handles to the casket. That was all that was left, basically. There was nothing of him left, right? And so I'm like, conventional burial doesn't take up space.
Right.
It just turns
Eventually,
it just turns you back, ashes to ashes, dust to dust.
which is a great point to raise, right? That someone would make an objection like, what do you care about what happens to the body? And in a certain sense, right, we affirm that obviously everyone is going to decay in their natural body, to ashes, dust to dust. But it's, as Christians, what we do with our body makes a statement about what we believe to be its importance. So obviously, we're not asserting that, oh, well, if you cremate your body or if you compost your body, that God doesn't have the power to resurrect you and put you back together again. That's of course nonsense. That's not the argument that's being made.
No. And the other thing, just from a secular perspective, let's take Arlington National Cemetery, for example, right? And compare it to a national park, right? Whether it's Yellowstone or wherever you want to go. It's a use of land that brings beauty. Mm-hmm. It brings civic reason. It brings important cultural ties to the history of your nation. How is that not good use of land?
Absolutely.
Right? It's just like, okay, so all cemeteries are bad? What percentage of the earth is covered by cemeteries? It'd be infinitesimal.
Right.
It would
minuscule.
Wouldn't
be even register.
0.1% or something, right?
Yeah.
So it's not true. It's not true. How many? I bet you there's more solar panels taking up land right now than perhaps cemeteries.
I'd be willing to bet that too.
Right. And they're good for the earth. How? Let's see. You can't recycle them. Right? It's like nuclear waste.
Yeah.
And when they're done, their use is done after, what's the life expectancy?
Oh, 10 to 12 years,
right.
Maybe 20 years.
You got to bury them like you would nuclear waste inside some mountain in Utah.
Yeah.
Right?
Not to mention the rare earth metals that you got to mine in order to make them.
But human composters are going to be complaining about Arlington National Cemetery is bad. So it's again, I think as believers, instead of just arguing with them face up just on because they're pagans, they don't believe the body and the soul, like dualism and all that stuff. So you can just use basic logic against them going, this makes no sense.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
It doesn't make any sense. If you want to compost grandpa in your backyard, I don't really care. But you shouldn't possibly think you can thrust this upon the rest of the population, right? And here's some reasons why, right?
Right.
Just basic logic, right? I guarantee these are the same people that want solar farms everywhere.
Yeah, it's part and parcel of the same worldview.
And windmills and all these other things, right? And and electric vehicles.
Yeah,
right?
it's all bundled together.
Right, which just are mined in every African nation, and all of the metals come from these other places. No
concern for them.
No, not at all. It's doing far more harm to the environment.
Right.
Vastly far more harm to the environment. But the Rhode Island General Assembly is not going to pass anything about putting an edict against mining in wherever, Zambia.
No.
Right? So, there's this duplicity constantly because it's never based on a sound principle. It's just always inconsistent logic to everything. And then they're going, that's because you're a racist, right? Or you're a bigot or whatever you are.
That's what it comes down to.
Right. It's not that you actually make good points and it's consistent, right, with the whole understanding of Western civilization based on. The thing that strikes me about this strata of people of progressive thought, they're also opposed to the death penalty, correct?
Generally. Yes, generally.
Generally.
Yeah.
Based on what? What consistent principle would they say?
Well, there's no consistent principle.
Right. It's cruelty. They would say it's cruelty.
Right. It's unjust.
It's unjust, right? But they can't, from a secular human perspective, say it's because the condemned, and I would use rightly condemned, right? Let's say if they're rightly condemned. But they're not arguing it's because they're made in the image of God.
Right. It has nothing to do with the dignity of the human body.
Right. Because if you carry that logic out, they wouldn't be composting grandma in the backyard if they thought it was about the image of God and human dignity. So it's not even. Yeah, it's such an incomplete. They're just going in circles.
Yeah, just a mishmash. It's exactly what you would expect if you're a regular observer of these things.
How about this one? I was thinking of this when you said we might talk about this today. I think about like so many progressive people I meet, and I try to be as kind as I can to them. They usually aren't as kind as to me as I am to them, but they're constantly walking their dog or dogs, right? How do you think they would treat their dogs in death?
Vastly superior to human beings, that's for sure.
You think they're composting Toby in the backyard?
No, they're probably more likely to cremate Toby and put his ashes in an urn on the mantle.
I think statistically that's absolutely true. And I'm not even trying to be pejorative. And again, just an example of it, right? We got a huge segment of our population who treats animals, their dogs, better than they treat human beings. And they raise them as if they're human beings, right? They have clothes and they
eat better than most human beings on the face of the planet.
They have diamond-studded collars, and they have air-conditioned rooms, and it's like, but they're just animals,
right?
Right? They're like, is your dog better than a cow, right?
Yeah.
Or an oxen, or a fisher cat, right?
Yeah.
And the answer is no, right? But it is to them, right? And they absolutely would not treat their animals this way. Well,
No.
I would at least a significant majority of them wouldn't. I'll be fair. A significant majority of them wouldn't do that, right? And but they'd be all for this, right? Again, it's just illogical. It's illogical. I guess the question now always, as we've talked about in Lively Faith, and since our genesis of this podcast, being Rhode Island, most Catholic state, those members of the House of Representatives, 75 of them, probably 2/3 of them are Roman Catholic. Why would you vote for this?
Right.
If you were actually a regenerate, believing Roman Catholic Christian, why would you vote for composting your dead relatives? Right. Again, that's really,
total disconnect.
That's always where our issues in Lively Faith come back to, right? It's faith that does the right thing. It's lively. It thinks things through. It's logical. It's consistent to the tradition and revelation that God's given us through the scriptures and through the church. And you can't possibly be saying you're trying to be consistent with that when you believe we should have body farms. And of course,
Can't get over that. What a word.
Not only that, guess where they're going to put the body farms? If you're looking at the geography of Rhode Island, where are you going to put body farms? It's like the when constantly we say, when the Johnson landfill is full, which will never happen because that'll be what, about 4,005. It'll be as high as Mount Washington someday because nobody else is ever going to want a landfill in Rhode Island.
Yeah.
Ever. Nowhere.
You're going to put it anywhere else.
Where are you going to put body farms?
Probably in the middle of Johnston.
Yeah. But you're not, where are they not going to be?
They're not going to be downtown East Greenwich or in Barrington.
Exactly. They're not going to be Barrington. They're not going to be on the waterfront.
Yeah.
In
Providence
Bristol.
waterfront.
Right. And they're gonna like, well, we're sticking this in West Greenwich, down by Fenton's house in West Greenwich, or in Richmond, right?
Or in the swamps of Exeter.
Seriously, right? It's like, it's total social bias and social economically driven, and it's like, but they're not going to be in the most posh neighborhoods.
Right.
You know? They're going to be somewhere else, somebody else's problem. And you smell that, man? What is that, Josh? That. Oh, they just bought 40 more bodies.
Oh, it's the body farm.
down the Break Hub Body Farm.
Yeah, that's got a nice ring to it.
Yeah, it's like it's exactly what it's going to be, though. You know, but it really cracks me up. How
we'll act surprised when it happens. How did we get here? But like they said in the article, it's just part of continuing culture of death, trend of dehumanizing human life.
You know, I can remember distinctly, I was in the 8th grade at Metcalf when it was junior high school. And it was the first time I saw, you think about it, that was 1977. So you're talking, it's 32 years after the end of the Second World War. Right? And I remember seeing for the first time the pictures of the concentration camps at the liberation of the camps. And these American engineering battalions of the Army just pushing these Jewish bodies by the tens of thousands into these holes, and just these naked men and women flopping into this hole. And just, how could any person say that is undignified and just an atrocity. Right? And they were going to be pushed into those holes and just burnt, dirt thrown on top of them. And that would at least appease these human composters, wouldn't it? But there's no dignity to it at all, right? They're just treated like chattel.
Well, and it's interesting you bring that up. That's the image that immediately came to my mind hearing the word body farm was concentration camps.
Yeah.
That's what it sounds like.
Yeah, I did too. It's interesting. We both were on that plane. We didn't discuss that at all. But that's exactly the image I had of those poor bodies of those hundreds of thousands of people.
Yeah.
And it's like, that's all you are. That's all you are. That's all your brother or sister human being is to you is
it's compost.
Right. It's like, we need to worry about them becoming nutrients in the ground. It's like that literally. I mean, not to be like to jest about this. I guess the best place to plant flowers will be on top of mass burials of genocide areas in the world.
If you follow that logic.
Yeah. Right. It's like, again, I don't think it's very hard to counter these measures with reason and logic, except the problem is that most people in government are neither one of those things.
No, we're far from that, especially in Rhode Island.
Right.
But even for Christians who wish to think critically about these things, all it takes is a few minutes of hitting the pause button and not getting emotional about it. If you submit to an emotional response, then your capacity for logic is going to be overridden. But if you take a step back, you realize that the Christian worldview, biblical worldview, provides very clear-cut answers for dealing with these issues.
Yeah, and you read the Catholic bishops, as usual, speak the most sense about almost all of these moral issues. But in the mainline Protestant group, you couldn't get one to come to the consensus that would find this repulsive.
No, absolutely.
No, right. And the Orthodox, our brother Corey, would tell us Orthodox don't even accept cremation.
Right.
Period. Right. So you have to have conventional burial in their understanding of the apostolic deposit of faith. So, but no, the mainline, they're probably up. I'm sure they have their representatives up there pushing for the whole thing anyway, right? The Green Initiative, and nothing more important than those issues to them. Again, and these are the same people that, statistically think that killing a baby in the womb is a good idea. It's like, right? What do they do with the remains of the baby?
I can presume that goes to waste, or it goes to the trash.
Yeah, it's going to a body farm with dignity, right?
Yeah.
It's and that's when they're not sold to steal their stem cells and everything else from them, right? So it is the culture of death. Whoever that representative had the courage to say that. God
absolutely.
Bless her, because it is. It's all related, every bit of it. The string, it's not even a string, it's cord connected to every one of these issues.
Yeah.
So it's just more of the same. More of the same. When life doesn't mean anything, how you dispose of life doesn't mean anything.
Right. And on the other hand, we'll conclude with this. For Christians, for our listeners, we have to remember that even with our last moments and what we do with our body can serve as a witness to the gospel. And in fact, it's going to be even more distinct and even more powerful when generations from now, everyone and their brother is composting their bodies, but you've got a remnant group of believing Christians who still gather and bury their dead.
Yeah, and you think the position like this puts in a family in, right? So you got, like most families, even families that have believers in them, there's non-believers somewhere, right? And so some non-believer, matriarch, patriarch's like, yep, no, you're just throwing me in the garden in the backyard.
Yeah.
Right? And so, Junior the second, the grandchild's like, Dad, why is Grandpa in a pile of leaves out there rotting? And what does that say about me? Is that what you're going to do to me when I die? I mean, there's all of these cause and effects to it, right? And it's not just about some political answer. It's about psychology, existential reality that will be could be devastating to. It is devastating to anybody. Yeah, if you really think through it, right? And it's like, so your answer is no, Junior. You're 5 years old. You have no value at all. And when you're dead, we're going to
you'll be compost just like the rest of us.
Whether you die this year, or when you're 85, we're going to throw you in a compost pile. It's like, well, thanks, Dad. Yeah.
Oh, gee.
Life's looking wonderful, right? And those are the realities of evil policies.
Yep.
That have it's destructive to the human endeavor and the common good, and we have to oppose it. And in this case, Rhode Island, we have zero chance of beating it in legislative process, but we need to speak the truth to as many people as we can so that they choose not to participate in the endeavor.
Yes, just another avenue of discipleship. All sunshine and rainbows here in the Ocean State, but
it is
absolutely a dimension of discipleship, and we do so with joy.
Absolutely, and that's what's so immense is that it gets being a disciple is more complicated with every passing day because technology drives it. Artificial intelligence is going to drive it, right? All of these things that all previous generations didn't even have to think about. And, you're going to finish your whole priesthood. So when you get to be my age, 30 years from now, you'll be like, oh my gosh, what I used to talk to Mark about is like child's play compared to what we're dealing with that'll be 2055, something like that.
Yeah, if you're listening to us in the YouTube archives 30 years into the future, congratulations. I'm sure what we've discussed here, it sounds very quaint.
You'll probably be jumping through time paradigms by then anyway. So.
Well, I think that's an appropriate place to wrap things up.
Yeah, that was a short one, but I think it's a really important issue that we addressed.
It's short, and it's just one of so many things that continually to pop up in our 24-hour news cycle, especially here in Rhode Island. So once again, I'd like to thank you all for watching us and listening to us today. If you haven't already, please like, subscribe, hit that bell for your notifications, and we look forward again to joining you next time. Thank you for listening to Lively Faith. God bless.